the mainstream or the dominant model of education is severely being criticized and often referred to as the factory model of education, based on, say, Ford Motor Company factory with an assembly line, where particular things would happen step by step manner, and the raw material that enters at one end would come out at the other end as a finished product. Right? So many have compared traditional schooling as a factory line or assembly line production of education. Right? So raw material, the students enter in grade 1 or KG or nursery, whatever that may be, and then year after year they go to the next part of the assembly line, and at the end of the 12 years you have a finished product. Right? And so this whole approach of factory style production has been severely criticized, particularly with the understanding we have even in the manufacturing area, where we no longer use assembly line methods of production, but more based on team productions and many other similar new management techniques. Given the criticism of the mainstream dominant model, what are the alternatives to this dominant model? Right? I want to discuss those alternatives in terms of giving you some idea of what those are, what do they entail, and what has been the success rate or failure in these dominant models or in these alternative models. One way to think about, there are many such models, so one way to think about them is what I have done is to classify them across two parameters. One is whether the education is directed by the student, self-directed education, or it is directed by an adult, so adult-directed education. So there is one clear parameter is that is student in charge of driving the learning, or is the adult, could be teacher, could be parent in some cases, is in charge of driving the learning. Right? And the second parameter that one could use to classify these alternative models is the location where the learning or education happens. One obviously common location or is the school itself, and alternative is that non-school location where education can also happen. Right? So if you look at these two parameters of self-directed versus adult-directed education, and located in a school or a building that resembles a school versus somewhere which is not a school. Right? So with these two parameters, you get sort of 4 quadrants. Right? So if you put self-directed in the top and school on the top of the other axis, you get a combination of self-directed education which happens in a structure called the school. Right? And in that box, you have some examples. Similarly, there will be other 4 boxes that I will talk about as we go along. So in the first box, which is the topmost box on the left-hand side of the quadrant, right, is the box of self-directed education taking place within a formal building called a school. Right. The examples there are 3 that I have picked up. One is Sudbury Valley School, second is Summerhill School, and third is Arohi Open Learning Community in Hosur in India. Let me just give you a little bit of description of 1 or 2 of them, so you get some sense of how are they run and how are they different from what we know as the dominant schooling model. The Sudbury Valley schools, which are the ones which started first, the first group started in US in Massachusetts by a person called Daniel Greenberg in 1968. Right. So it is quite an old model in that sense. Now there are hundreds of schools around the world which call themselves usually Sudbury Valley School or some variation of that name. How is this school different? So the way they describe it, Sudbury Valley School is a place where people decide for themselves how to spend their days. Here students of all ages determine what they will do, as well as when, how, and where they will do it. So students are fully in charge of their own learning. They are able to decide on any given day what they want to do, whether they want to do anything at all that can be called learning, or just sit around and play games or even sleep. Right. They are completely free to decide what they want to do once they enter that building. There is no curriculum. There is no compulsory pace of education that you must learn certain things by this age or by this class. Right. Other important thing about the Sudbury Valley School is that the learning happens across age groups. Since there is no classroom defined by age, right, students of all ages can mix together, learn from each other, right? And the peer learning is a very common form within the school. Some of the schools are recognized by the local government, some are not. So depending on the legal and regulatory system, they could be recognized or could be unrecognized. The Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts is recognized by an independent school association in the state. So this is the basic structure of the Sudbury Valley School. The one interesting part of the Sudbury Valley is the democratic process of working. So not only students are free to decide what they want to learn, how they want to learn, and when they want to learn, they are also in charge of running of the school itself. Right. So there are school-wide weekly meetings where all the affairs of the schools are being discussed. Within that meeting, each person has one vote that includes students as well as the staff, which could be teaching, non-teaching staff depending on how they are being defined. Right. So each person has just one vote, right? Adult as well as the students. They have their own parliamentary procedures through which they negotiate and even put out the punishment when appropriate, right? So many of these processes are done quite democratically. So democracy is not a system they learn outside. They actually not only learn but also practice within the school itself. One interesting variation in the Sudbury School is the judicial committee. This is a committee of students as well as in this Sudbury Valley School is a one staff member and 4 students who are members on a rotating basis. They meet to hear the complaints and hear the 2 sides of the stories and then decide what's the right punishment for or encouragement depending on what the situation may be for the case that is in front of them. Right. So Sudbury Valley School, full freedom to learn, a democratic process of governance where adults and students have the similar rights and responsibilities. Right. So that's the one very well developed model of alternative schooling that exists. The first one was in US. The second one I'm going to talk about is Summerhill School, which started in UK. It was the first school was started by Mr. Neil in 1921. Right? He was actually a teacher in the regular school at the time, got very frustrated with the way he had to deal with the students and found it very difficult for him to do what he was required to do with the regular school. So then he started his own school, which is known as Summerhill School. There are of course many such variations of this school in UK and around. This school also runs very similar to the Sudbury School in terms of the freedom to the students. It also has democratic governance structures similar to Sudbury School. Right. One thing interesting about Summerhill School is that in the late 90s, the regulatory agency in the UK asked them to close it down because they did not meet the basic requirement of what was of the school. Right. One simple fact that it was not compulsory for students to learn anything in any given day, and that was seen as anathema to the mainstream way of thinking about what a school should be doing every day. Right. The case actually went to the courts. Summerhill school parents and educators fought against the regulator, and finally they won a case against the regulator. Right. Now they are recognized school, and you will find if you search about them, that now they are seen even by the UK regulator, Ofsted, as one of the exemplary schools in the country. Right? So they have come from a point of getting unrecognized to now being seen by the same regulatory agency as one of the top performing schools in the country. These two models are in a sense abroad. A third model of Arohi, which is a similar one, which is near Bangalore in India. Now many people have been wondering how would such a system could possibly work. Right? If the students are not required to do anything specifically, would they ever learn anything? Right? There's quite a bit of research. As you can see, Summerhill was started in 1921, Sudbury won 1968. So many generations of people have graduated from this school. There's a research being done on the graduates of these schools, and much of the research points out that they actually have a pretty normal life in terms of the traditional parameters of measuring success, in terms of going to college, having a family, having a career, being well-to-do in whatever careers they are following. Right? So in all of those areas of traditional measures of success, they do as well as the regular school students. One area that you can imagine they would do far better is in their own self-confidence, in their own capacity to guide themselves and learn what they want to learn. So that whole aspect, right? So personal control and self-development is ingrained in that, which will be not so common in the students, so common in the students of the rest of the schools. So that's our first box on the top, learning in a school. The second box in a school, now keeping the school as a constant, the second box will be adult directed learning in a school. Of course, the classic example is about traditional or mainstream schools, which are adult directed and happen in a building called a school. There are 2 or 3 other similar kinds of structures which have a different pedagogy, and therefore they are different in terms of what happens in the school and the classroom, what teachers do, what are the expectations of the parents' participation within the school. So those parameters vary across the other types of schools which are adult directed. One sort of more popular example is Montessori schools. Many of you have heard of those schools. Many such schools in India. Second model is of Rudolf Steiner, started a school called Waldorf School in Germany, which now has many imitations around the world, including many cities of India. Variation of the traditional school, which is the Rishi Valley School, based on the philosophy of Krishnamurti. So those are the models within the adult directed education. So the conventional schools that we know as schools are not the only schools within that category. There are within several others which exist, which have very different philosophy and different approach to learning and teaching. Now coming to the third box of keeping the self-directed education, the location is not a school. Right? This can happen, this is also now quite widely known as unschooling, because you are not in a school of any kind. So school used to be called also sometimes de-schooling. So that term which are used to describe this approach to education. In a school, so there are many other places that can happen. There are cooperatives, the facilities that young people would need in order to educate themselves, right? There are resource centers which are built by local city governments where people are free to go and use those resources to continue their self-learning process, which are of course open not only to school-going age children but also to the adults for them to do the similar self-learning discovery. Right. So those are the schools largely categorized as unschools or unschooling. The fourth and the last box is adult-directed learning, which happens outside a school. Right? Common example which is used here is homeschooling, right? Which is adult-directed. Parents or family members are in charge of the schooling. They follow usually similar curriculum and structure that is followed by a normal school, but it happens in a home as opposed to in a school. Right? One could also include the modern methods of learning, the online instructions like a Khan Academy and others, which are adult directed but can happen outside school buildings, right? And they do happen outside mostly school buildings. Right? So that's the fourth sort of box of alternative schooling. So we have discussed sort of 4 different types of alternative schooling models, actually schooling models, one of which also is a traditional school model as part of that, right? And this is important to think about when you think about reforming the current education system, right? So reform simply does not mean how to do well what we are currently doing. It could also mean rethinking completely what we are doing altogether.